This is the Good Morning Isla 200 show.
This podcast was prepared by the fall 2023 cohort of Isla 200 Islamic Civilizations at McGill University.
Grab a warm drink and tune in as our presenters take you on a deep dive into Islamicate history with reflections on how they relate to contemporary Muslim life and culture.
Welcome. This is another segment of the Isla 200 podcast series. Today we'll be discussing how the modern influence of the supermodel Bella Hadid is parallel to that of the historical Muslim woman and sort of what barriers they've encountered and they still encounter today. But before that, let's introduce everyone here today.
Sure.
So
my name is Ariana. I'm from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, and I'm a first year here at McGill. And before taking this class, I really had a minimal understanding of Islam and Islamic civilization. So I'm kind of bringing that to the table of not really all of this being very new to me. Also, I have the Western aspect since I am from Canada, so I think that'll be interesting to see how it compares to everyone else here.
Yeah, and I'm Ayana, and I'm from the U.S., from Connecticut. And before here, I think I had a pretty Western stereotype maybe towards Islam in the Middle East. I had taken some classes at a university near my house about it, but I think still it was quite biased perspective. And also my family is from Romania, so I do have that perspective a bit. But yeah, I think that perspective is very limited because you may not really explore the culture much.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Louis. I'm French, so I'll also bring a Western perspective, but even though it's probably going to be different from you American people. So I'm also a stranger to the Islamic world. I'm a Catholic person, but I guess it'll also be interesting in this discussion.
Hello everyone, my name is Paul. I'm from Germany, but I grew up in England, and I'm also a first year at McGill studying philosophy and religious studies. So I have some knowledge going into this course, but I'd also level that I have a very basic amount of knowledge, and I definitely didn't know much about Islamic culture before this course.
It's perfect. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know you're in religious studies. That's pretty interesting. Yeah. Is anyone? What are your programs? Is anyone else in religious studies?
Nope. I'm in political science. Second year, but.
Okay. So
what about you, Jad?
I'll introduce myself. My name is Jad. I'm actually studying architecture, so I'm very far away from this field. I'm Lebanese, but I was born and raised in Saudi Arabia. My family is Sunni Muslim, so I do practice that at home. I moved to Montreal 2 years ago, and I decided to take this class as sort of an elective to kind of basically for this to learn other people's perspectives and sort of get a better understanding of what this side of the world not views Islam, but maybe sort of teaches it or understands it.
So you're in architecture, but still know already a lot about this.
Exactly. And you can argue that architecture has a link to Islam because there's a lot of Islamic architecture, and I mean the beginning of the class we kind of covered a bit of that. So.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, so today we're going to talk about pop culture, as you said earlier, and how it relates to women in Islam contemporarily. So despite the fact that it's a very international thing, as we saw, we all come from different places and we all have very different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. Let's see what everybody has to bring to this discussion.
It's definitely gonna be very interesting. So just to give a brief overview of the focus of the episode. So it's basically the influence of Muslim women by drawing parallels between historical figures like Al-Khansaa, which we went over during class, Fatima al-Fihri. Even maybe we're going to be referencing the Virgin Mary and sort of how she's influenced contemporary Muslim women with a sort of not comparison but just a
parallel.
A parallel, yeah, with modern influences. For example, if you guys want to mention some of them.
We have Nemesis, Eliana, and also obviously we're going to be emphasizing Bella Hadid's Instagram, just Bella Hadid in general.
Well, that's also an interesting thing because, for example, it may seem very casual, but from before studying and doing a bit of research on this, I didn't know Bella Hadid was Muslim at all. So I guess it's
that's another thing. Like I guess like we all come from very different backgrounds, but Bella Hadid, like we all know who Bella Hadid is.
Exactly.
Before this class, and like we all knew who she was. So really like going into depth about how she maybe comes from this sort of Islamic society, or anyways, we'll get into more detail throughout the podcast. Yeah.
Let's get started.
Okay, so we're gonna be like sort of discussing this like main like question, like this like broad question: how do the modern influences of supermodel Bella Hadid parallel those of historical Muslim women, and what barriers do they face today? So just introducing the concept of celebrating the impact and achievements of Muslim women, both historically and contemporary. If anyone wants to like go ahead and sort of give a brief.
Yeah, so I feel like the general aims today are going to be to draw connections between the modern influence of supermodel Bella Hadid, obviously, and the very rich history of Muslim women, and it's going to be a journey that leads us to understand the barriers they faced in the past and those that persist today.
As an example of that, perhaps we consider the link between Bella Hadid and the pre-Islamic Arabian poet Al-Khansaa, who is renowned for her eulogies to her dead brother. And this can be compared in a very pertinent context to the most recent posts on Bella Hadid's Instagram, which are about the current atrocities in the Palestinian region, and thus we can see how even though there's almost a millennia of difference between these two figures, they're still fighting for the rights of people that have been affected by war and strife.
You know, the topic is like, it's a very like broad and like thought-provoking like topic. You know, it's gonna like guide the entire podcast into like these realms of like influence, activism, like societal challenges, and like,
you know, like draw connections that you wouldn't have expected to see from the modern world to the historical.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. And we won't just be looking at these two figures, like we'll also be looking at a lot of figures to try to like bridge the gap between the historical context as well as the modern context.
Yeah, I feel like by understanding the challenges faced by these historical figures, but also the modern influencers, we're gonna foster a deeper appreciation for the multifaceted nature of their contributions.
Absolutely.
So like, yeah.
You can sort of say like, we're gonna like bridge the gap between like the past and the present.
Exactly.
By like shedding light on like the commonalities and like the disparities that shape these two like narratives.
Because it may feel surprising, but yeah, throughout our researches earlier, there are a lot of in common between these two. So
buckle up as we embark on this fascinating journey through time and culture.
I'll follow you, Paul. I'll follow you.
No, we all will. We all. I mean, we all have to. It's what we're going to be talking about today. For the next half an hour.
Okay, so first we're gonna shine a spotlight on some remarkable Muslim women from the past who defied norms and left like large marks on their societies. So first we're going to explore Al-Khansaa, who was a poet and woman fighter, and who had a very large contemporary influence similar to Bella Hadid, and used her platform to advocate for what she believed in.
Yeah, so so both of them, like Bella Hadid and Al-Khansaa, each used like their platforms. You can argue that Al-Khansaa's platform was like poetry and like her elegies, and Bella Hadid's platform is sort of like her modeling career or her Instagram page more specifically, and they both use these like platforms to kind of like speak up about what they believe in and share their ideas and like
it shows like
influence.
It shows just as well, like no matter what, these two are like the top of their time. They're both super influential women. No matter what, even though they have such a large time difference, they still have this amazing platform where they're using it for good and what they believe in. And as we can see with Bella Hadid currently, as we'll get into more, how she's advocating and using that.
And they both stand out of like their current society's norms. We can see how also they were viewed as, like, for example, Al-Khansaa. She was very much viewed as an anomaly in her culture, like a departure from the stereotypical Arab woman. So she was relatively very independent, I feel we could argue.
Yeah, you can say she like faced a form of othering. With her to like respective culture.
A beautiful way to formulate it.
Yeah, so like this like kind of sentiment like resonates with Bella Hadid's experience as well.
True.
Like, I mean, some can argue that, especially from my perspective, that Bella Hadid is not Muslim and Bella Hadid is not Palestinian, but like the reality is that she identifies as like Palestinian, she identifies as Muslim. So
and what were her father's name?
Yeah, her dad's called Muhammad Hadid, so like that's the name of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So it's like sort of it creates this kind of like this process of like racialization, like coupled with like these gender stereotypes, is very evident in like these challenges that have been like created in like these like
societal norms. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
I see what you mean.
I think it's important to mention though that the purpose of their works, Bella Hadid and Al-Khansaa, are perhaps to be taken slightly differently, because Al-Khansaa is, after all, writing sort of letters of eulogy or aretha to one specific person, her dead brother, and one or two other male figures in her life, whereas Bella Hadid seems to be using her whole platform to speak out about lots of different injustices happening in the world. So it's even though there is a difference in the audience that receives these works and these words, I think that the inherent sort of purpose is somewhat similar and can definitely be compared, and is also indicative of independent, empowered women under an Islamic sort of setting.
For sure. I've read articles about how like Al-Khansaa broke down stereotypes about women's role in her society, like for through the writing of rithas and different poems. But she became quite influential and recognized in the Arab world, in the same way that today Bella Hadid, it's the same. Like she broke the idea that women are confined to predefined categories in the Western culture, especially, and she arrived and broke everything up, and also it's important. Like it seems obvious, but it's important to note that for that, well, not only for that, but she is a superstar. Like she's really appreciated. So
no, definitely, and it's also like I think in the exploration of like looking at all these historical. I wouldn't really say just Muslim women, but like women in like Islamic societies. It's essential to like recognize like the significance of other like important figures. For example, maybe the Virgin Mary or other like women from the Sahaba that would participate in battles. So like these women demonstrated like exceptional courage and commitment, similar to Bella Hadid's use of her Instagram to sort of
advocate.
Yeah, exactly.
It's okay. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say it's interesting that you evoke the Virgin Mary, because from a more Catholic perspective, she's less a woman of her own than the Mother of God, of Jesus, and so to see her as an independent character, it's not the obvious way. I'd say. I don't know what you think about this.
I mean, it's interesting because in like Islam, in the Quran actually, she has her own like her own surah, which is like a chapter in the Quran called Surah Maryam, which means like the Virgin Mary, like the chapter, like the Mary chapter. That's what it's called, and the entire like chapter, as well as another chapter called Ali Imran, which is about like the tribe which she came from. So like the Quran really like talks about how like she came from this very like important and like highly like revered family. So yeah, and it talks about how she gave birth to Jesus Christ all on her own. So she was this like powerful independent woman. very similar to all the women we've been discussing, talking about.
She did it all herself.
She did it all herself.
To Al-Khansaa or Bella Hadid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, the Quran talks. There are like specific verses that talk about her going to this palm tree and giving birth under a palm tree, all on her own. I think there was a mention. I'm not sure about this, of the angel Gabriel helping her, but I think it was like mainly like that she did it by herself.
Okay. Well, thank you for this clarification.
Yeah.
I mean, in comparison to the Catholic tradition, which is very focused on that the Virgin Mary is a very important concept, and that
for sure.
that the Son of the Lord Christ is born by an immaculate conception, means that she almost has no choice in this matter of giving birth to the most, arguably the most important figure in Christianity at large, which contrasts heavily with the Islamic scripture you mentioned, and I think that's interesting, because Western tendencies to see the East or the Oriental world in air quotes seems to see the East as the complete antithesis to the West, and it's interesting to see that there are lots of cases where this is actually reversed. One thing I would say about Bella Hadid, though, is that her pertinence is exacerbated by the fact that while she's Islamicate inspired, she did grow up in the States.
That's true.
In California.
True.
So looking at her Instagram, it's not perhaps, obviously apart from her surname, it's not perhaps immediately clear that she's a staunchly Muslim woman. That's not all of her identity.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to note as well that a lot of her fashion choices on her Instagram are sort of very show very classic Americana youth fashion, like sweatpants and Uggs, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's also interesting to consider the Western influence in her, within her.
Yeah, it's also like interesting to see how it wasn't until recently that she started advocating for, Palestine, since she is Palestinian, and she didn't state until recently in an interview with Vogue that she was Muslim. And I know
only about 2 years ago.
It was about 2, it was really recent.
I mean, like, she's not the typical like hijabi Muslim
Right,
woman.
absolutely,
That you,
yeah.
see.
I didn't even know she was Muslim, as I said it earlier. I learned it through this work.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems to me that the more we talked about these past great figures of women in the Islamic world, like Al-Khansaa, the Virgin Mary, the more we talk about it, the more I feel like it resonates with like the lives of contemporary figures, and like especially Bella Hadid in like their questioning of the norms of their times.
No, definitely. I think it's time we can like get into like more detail about like her Instagram and sort of like discuss that and how like trace her journey from like a model to like an advocate,
an activist.
An activist, yeah.
See how she's grown over her career.
Okay, so sort of diving more like into the modern realm of social media activism and like where our main topic revolves around, and our cultural product is none other than Bella Hadid's Instagram. So her platform has become sort of like this canvas where like her identity has been like transformed from like a supermodel to this like Islamicate vocal advocate that like talks about various causes, and like she advocates for like various lots of various
issues going on.
And shedding light on things that people are perhaps not so aware of.
Especially like if you look at models in general, or just like supermodels or other influencers, she stands out of most of them because she is this super huge figure in the world. She is a supermodel, but she's also a huge advocate and very influential person. So she has both of those things going with her.
She's like a voice for social justice.
She's not a Kate Moss, Paris Hilton type.
Something like that.
And she started to use her Instagram account actually like quite recently for activism.
Yeah, that's true.
She was initially more focused solely on her fashion career, but as of 2020 she began like to advocate for issues like Sudan, Black Lives Matter protests in the US, but also the Lebanon and Turkey earthquake. And so like it's a lot of causes that she started to defend, and it also shows how her mentality evolved throughout time.
And I think it also shows like just how big of an impact she has in these different areas, because like living in the US, I remember when she posted about the Black Lives Matter protests, and like that was like a really big thing that she posted.
Yeah, I always remember hearing about how she was always the first influencer, first person with a platform to talk about it. She was always the one sharing it, then other influencers would repost her things or add on to it.
And even today, every day, even like we could go on her Instagram account right now and check her stories.
You can see all,
there would probably be posts in favor of Palestine.
Yeah, everything recent on her Instagram currently is towards Palestine. I haven't seen any recent posts of her modeling career, and out of any other influencers, she is the only one who is so actively doing this.
That's true, but she talks a lot about like Islamic society countries, so like we said, like Lebanon, Turkey. She also talks a bit like about like she advocates for like the challenges faced by like Pakistani children. But like other than like looking at Muslim countries or Arab countries, she also talks a lot about like Ayana said, the Black Lives Matter protests and like Native American Heritage Month as well. I remember seeing a post on her Instagram about that.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. It's very interesting to see how different parts of her upbringing and her background influence different parts of her feed. Because for example, in the post that I mentioned previously, where she's dressed in this very sort of American fashion, she's speaking out about like mental health issues faced by people around the world, but especially in the States. And perhaps she's making a statement from her more Western American side about these issues, and perhaps also implying that her Islamicate Eastern background are that those kind of cultures where that she's supporting are perhaps less engaged with these issues. So she's using her multi-background and this intersectionality to really speak out about a whole plethora of issues.
It's something that concerns us very directly as students in Montreal, is how she uses so obviously her influence to shed light on global concerns, but not only in as you said, not only in the Islamic world, but also, for example, she advocated for that in 2021 for the law on secularism in Quebec.
Bill 21.
Bill 21, exactly. You've got it. So this was a bill that bans any religious symbol for public servants in position of authority. So, for example, lawyers, policemen, etc. And this was very controversial because it obviously prevents Muslim women to dress and wear hijab, for example. So
also, it's interestingly a complete repeat of an ongoing debate, especially in France, with the rule of laïcité, which has been a rule in France for centuries now. And it's interesting to see how this has suddenly been transferred to a smaller francophone community in what is a mostly anglophone country.
It shows like the connection between Quebec and France are always going to be very strong.
Also Belgium as well. Like I think there's something happening there as well. With the same issue.
Laicity is very, very important in France. It's in the center of a lot of things.
Yeah, and it's only very recently that horrible acts of terror were committed in France, like the Charlie Hebdo attacks, not necessarily because of these laïcité laws, but I feel that these kinds of laws threaten dialogue between different religious communities and only breed ignorance, which is something that Bella Hadid is obviously staunchly opposed to, since she considers all different kind of cultures and backgrounds and all different kind of struggles.
I mean, like her like passionate plea about like this entire like issue sort of challenges like the egocentricity of those making decisions about like women or like Muslim women, and it like resonates with like the ongoing struggle against Islamophobia, sexism, misogyny, and like all of these like ideas.
And well, like the more we talk about it, the more like whatever the cause, she's we can obviously conclude on the fact that she advocates a lot for social causes, and especially in the Muslim world, but not only. And I feel like it brings us to compare to a comparison with Al-Khansaa and Haritha, her eulogies to her brother, in the sense that both Bella and Al-Khansaa, well, obviously in very different ways, because these eras have nothing to do with each other, but so they use their platforms to communicate deeply and personal messages to society.
However, another interesting point is raised by that because suddenly we become aware of, I think this sheds light on Western attitudes towards the East and towards the very opposite of what Westerners have in the past felt to be. And Al-Khansaa has often been, lots of women coming from Islamic civilizations have been termed by ignorant Western thinkers and scholars as oppressed, as people who were subjugated, who were relegated to the household. And it's interesting to see how that reputation has still stained Al-Khansaa's image in the West. But when someone like Bella Hadid, who's kind of, I guess, been, according to these people, almost, whitewashed, that it's suddenly much more acceptable for her to feel empowered and to be empowered and to speak out about these issues without being seen as some sort of victim of oppression.
I mean, she is very empowered. The language she uses in her post is like
absolutely. But I mean, so is the language that Al-Khansaa uses.
Exactly.
And
So
not let people see her as some sort of slave.
I mean, like she says, like I don't know. She talks about like the egocentrics of a man to think for even 1 second that they have enough validity to make decisions for a woman in 2022, which was when this was happening, are not only laughable but actually sick in the head. So she's like using these like very like powerful words. It's like
very harsh language. I mean,
yeah.
But I think it's also what the platform requires. A poem is different from a caption.
That's true.
Instagram post. An Instagram post is much more journalistic. It needs to grab the attention of the reader immediately, whereas a poem is meant to be read and reread, and the subtleties have to be considered too.
That's true, but I mean, even Al-Khansaa uses like very powerful and like strong language in her poems. So
I feel like what Bella Hadid is trying to do with her captions, she's trying to reach a very large audience, since obviously she knows that she has such a large platform, like millions and millions of people follow her. So she's trying to get very, very specific and strong words, so she grabs the attention of the people just scrolling and reading.
And this is a common theme with other important female figures coming from an Islamic culture or influenced by Islamic cultures, such as Zaha Hadid, who's well known for her quite bombastic buildings, and I'm sure our local architect major could speak more to that. But it's a common theme that once sort of given this platform, Muslim women or women who are influenced by an Islamic background are already able to build their audience and to speak about issues that are pertinent to them.
I mean, Zaha Hadid is a very she's had a profound influence on like the field of architecture, especially with like Muslim women, and like in like Muslim countries, she's very she's viewed as like someone I don't know, she's just her influence on Muslim women in architecture, especially. I mean, she broke like all these gender barriers about like usually in the Middle East, or actually all around the world, architecture has been practiced by men in the past. I mean, recently it's shifted a lot, and I feel like Zaha Hadid was one of those influential people that kind of helped to create this shift. And the fact that she is a Muslim Arab woman really shows like the power and the impact that they can have.
But once again, people could absolutely refrain from calling her some sort of victim of oppression. So it's still interesting to see how
that's true.
That interplay.
Even though everything wasn't always easy for her, the path to being such a supermodel, there were a lot of backlashes, and I guess
I know they have the same last names, Zaha Hadid, Bella Hadid, but they're not related, and they're not from the same place. But Zaha Hadid's Iraqi and Bella Hadid's Palestinian.
You're right to make the clarification.
But I think to see this type of whitewashing, you can kind of see the effect that had on Bella Hadid herself, with her different plastic surgery. That kind of thing.
Growing up, Bella Hadid, she's spoken out a lot that she really wanted to repress her Palestinian background and more focus on her mom, who is, I believe, Dutch. So as you can tell, Bella Hadid had a nose job when she was really young. I'm not sure the exact age, but she was a teenager. And she's spoken up a lot now, saying that she heavily regrets, one, being allowed to get a nose job at such a young age, but also losing that
How old was she?
I'm not exactly sure, but definitely in her teenage years. But how she really regrets it and wishes she still had that cultural aspect of her, because she feels that she really wants to make herself more Western to adapt to the societal norms. Yeah.
I did a quick fact check, and she was 14 years old.
Yeah, she was really young. I mean, she was always kind of in the spotlight, so I believe she got a lot of criticism for like that aspect of her looks. But now she's saying, especially, she's embraced a lot more of her Palestinian side.
The first thing that came up when I googled like Bella Hadid nose job, it brought up this quote: "I wish I had kept the nose of my ancestors."
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's powerful. Yeah, that's powerful. Wow.
Okay, so now as we're like finishing this episode, so throughout this episode we've embarked on like a journey throughout time, and we explored the parallels of different historical Muslim women like Al-Khansaa, and then contemporary influences like Bella Hadid and her Instagram. And we have just like drawn parallels between their kind of victories and their struggles.
So we sort of like, I guess, we talked about how like these female figures paved the way, and how like their legacies like inspires like a new generation of women around the world, or Muslim women around the world.
And it shows that no matter what time you're in, there's always going to be people who are advocating and standing out and make it so that other people feel compelled to advocate and speak out.
I mean,
especially women.
Yeah,
in this
definitely.
sense.
Like we've witnessed the evolution of Bella Hadid being a supermodel into this powerful advocate, addressing global issues, confronting discrimination. So these parallels between historical struggles and modern changes highlight the enduring strength and resilience of Muslim women. And Bella's journey reflects the complexity of advocacy in the digital age. Her challenges, regrets, and activism sort of underscore the broader, if you can say, like intersectionality of identity, beauty standards, societal expectations,
and of course, cultural origins, and how one grows up to. As a first generation immigrant, there are many different influences in our personal life.
Yeah.
No, 100%. I mean, like from Bill 21 in Quebec to global discrimination, we've examined the restrictions on women and like the fight against sexism, misogyny, and Islamophobia through like Bella Hadid's voice or lens.
To mental health awareness too, actually.
That as well.
Like it's interesting to see like in a Montreal lens how we're viewing that, especially from Bill 21.
I mean, like these issues like hit close to home. Like they echo the struggles faced by like these women who are around us. I mean, like we live in a very like metropolitan sort of city where like there are people or women from all over the world, and many of them being from Muslim society.
It's also very important and significant that public figures position themselves, like for example on Bill 21, like because it was passed with a special clause in Canada's political system, which is the notwithstanding clause. So obviously it's not the subject today, but it's a very controversial clause. Basically, it enables you to enact a law even though it's not constitutional. So
really?
It's actually paradoxical, but this clause itself is constitutional. So it's very
goes around
so exactly it's very controversial, and like it has been observed like before that when laws were enacted thanks to this clause, like public opinion and like public backlash played a major role in either confirming the law or like taking it away. So like if public figures such as Bella Hadid position themselves, it actually can have an impact.
Okay, that's very interesting. I actually didn't know that. So there you have it from a political science major. So I guess as we like wrap up, we just encourage everyone, our listeners, to reflect on the narratives we've explored today, the very diverse narratives and diverse voices.
and to reflect on your own
Yeah, no, definitely.
prejudices
No,
and
100%.
what might influence you to think about certain things in certain ways and how you can avoid that.
100%. And I think these stories of like these women are not really isolated. They're sort of like interconnected threads in like this like
Of course. Yeah.
rich tapestry of like Islamic civilization or like Islamic societies. So let's continue these conversations, break these barriers, and celebrate the impact of Muslim women throughout history and today.
Yeah.
Well,
The key to understanding and the avoidance of ignorance is just dialogue. So it's a very important step to take.
100%.
thank you to everybody.
Thank you for
Yeah,
joining us
thanks,
on this
guys.
episode.
I actually loved it. It
Yeah,
was,
no,
very
I
interesting.
actually, yeah, no, 100%. All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
This podcast was prepared by the fall 2023 cohort of ISLA 200 Islamic Civilizations at McGill University.